There are moments in life when the weight of it all presses so heavily on your chest that even breathing feels like an effort. You wake up, and before the day even begins, you can sense the fatigue in your bones. It isn't just physical, it's emotional, spiritual, existential. You've tried, you've hoped, you've believed, and yet the outcome you've been praying for still feels distant. You start to wonder if something is wrong with you. If maybe you're not strong enough, not faithful enough, not disciplined enough. But that isn't true. Weariness is not weakness. The fact that you're weary is proof that you've been contending with life, that you've chosen meaning over comfort, purpose over passivity. Only those who carry real responsibility, who strive to do what is right even when it costs them, ever reach the point of exhaustion like this. When you decide to live with integrity, to shoulder burdens that are not easy to bear, you are inevitably going to feel the strain. It's the law of existence. Everything meaningful requires sacrifice. To love deeply, to build something lasting, to endure injustice without surrendering to bitterness. All of that demands something from your soul. And when the world seems indifferent to your effort, when your sacrifices appear unnoticed or unrewarded, that's when the weariness seeps in. You begin to think, what's the point? But there is a point. There always is. The point is that you've chosen to keep going even when there's no applause, and that decision alone reveals more about your strength than any visible victory could. It's easy to misinterpret fatigue as failure. We look around and see others smiling, succeeding, moving forward effortlessly. Or at least it appears that way. But most of those people are wearing masks just as you have. Everyone is carrying something heavy, and the ones who seem the strongest are often those who have simply learned how to walk with their pain. God doesn't shame you for feeling tired. In fact, that very exhaustion is the space where He begins to meet you. Because in your weariness, you finally stop pretending that you can sustain everything on your own. You reach the point where your own strength ends, and that is precisely where divine strength begins. We are told that even the strongest creatures grow faint, but those who wait on the Lord renew their strength. That renewal doesn't come from pretending that you're fine when you're not. It comes from being honest with yourself, with God, about how much it hurts. There's a kind of sacred humility in admitting that you're human. When you do, you allow grace to fill the gaps that effort alone cannot. God is not disappointed in your fatigue. He is moved by it, because it means you've been doing the hard work of living faithfully in a world that constantly pulls you towards cynicism and despair. The truth is, being weary doesn't mean you've lost your way. It often means you're right where you need to be, on the edge of something new, standing at the border between what has been and what is about to unfold. The soil of transformation is always damp with the sweat and tears of perseverance. Every hero in Scripture, every person of deep faith knew exhaustion intimately. David cried until he had no strength left. Elijah, the great prophet, asked God to let him die because he felt too weary to go on. Yet in both cases, renewal came not because they were superhuman, but because they refused to give up. So if you're weary tonight, don't mistake that feeling for weakness. It's a sign that you're alive to the struggle, that you haven't gone numb, that your heart is still fighting for what matters. God sees that. He knows how hard it's been to keep believing when nothing changes. But He also knows that the story isn't over yet. And maybe, just maybe, this weariness you feel is not at the end of something, but the quiet proof that your breakthrough is already beginning to take shape. Life has a way of moving in patterns that we often fail to see until we've walked through them. There's a rhythm woven into existence, a cycle of suffering and renewal, of breaking and rebuilding. It's the same rhythm that governs the changing of seasons, the rising and setting of the sun, the ebb and flow of the tide. Everything that lives must pass through darkness before it can stand in the light again. And this is true not just for the world around us, but for the soul within us. When you're in the middle of hardships, it's easy to think something has gone wrong. But often, the pain you feel isn't a sign that life has collapsed. It's evidence that transformation has begun. Think about a seed buried in the soil. From the outside, it looks like nothing is happening. The surface remains silent, unmoved. But deep beneath that quiet ground, a miracle is unfolding. The seed is breaking open, dying to what it was so it can become what it's meant to be. That breaking is necessary. Without it, no roots would grow, no stem would rise, and no flower would bloom. The same is true of us. We all have to face seasons where everything familiar breaks apart, where we can't see the purpose in our pain. Yet those are often the moments when God is doing His most significant work. The truth is, growth and comfort rarely coexist. You cannot evolve without disruption. The moments that shake you, that force you to your knees, are often the ones that reveal who you really are and what your faith is made of. There's a strange kind of wisdom in the struggle. It strips away illusions, demands honesty, and pushes you to confront what you've been avoiding. And though it hurts, that process brings clarity. You start to understand that the breaking is not punishment, it's preparation. So many people give up right before the pattern shifts. They assume that the darkness they're in will last forever, not realizing that every winter carries the promise of spring. The soil of despair often conceals the roots of renewal. God allows seasons of emptiness because they clear space for something new to grow. If He gave you everything you wanted the moment you asked, your faith would remain shallow. It's through waiting, through wrestling, through weariness, that you develop the depth to hold what He's preparing for you. It's natural to want to escape suffering. No one seeks out pain, but there's something redemptive about understanding that pain has a place within the divine order. It doesn't mean we celebrate it. It means we endure it with awareness that it serves a higher design. Chaos is not the opposite of order. It's often the birthplace of it. You can't rebuild your life until you've faced what was broken, and you can't appreciate peace until you've known the weight of turmoil. God doesn't waste pain. Every tear, every disappointment, every unanswered prayer contributes to the shaping of your spirit. And here's the remarkable thing. When you begin to recognize that rhythm, something shifts in you. You stop seeing your suffering as meaningless. You stop blaming yourself for being in the valley. You start to trust that just as day follows night, renewal follows loss. This doesn't make the waiting easy. It gives the waiting meaning. You begin to realize that your life is part of something larger, something intelligent, something sacred. So when the night feels long and the silence of God feels unbearable, remember, winter does not cancel spring, it makes it possible. You may not see it yet, but the pattern of renewal is already in motion. The same God who governs the turning of the seasons is at work in the rhythm of your life. And if you can hold on, if you can endure just a little longer, you'll find that your suffering was not the end of your story. It was the soil out of which your breakthrough began to grow. There's something profoundly humbling about realizing that the greatest movements of God often occur where we cannot see them. We tend to look for signs, visible progress, answered prayers, doors swinging open. But divine work rarely begins in the open. It begins in silence, in secrecy, beneath the surface where human eyes cannot reach. Just because you can't see evidence of change doesn't mean God is absent. In fact, the absence of visible proof often means He's doing something deeper, something that requires time and hidden preparation. When nothing appears to be happening, that's often when everything is being rearranged behind the scenes. Think about how life itself begins in hiddenness. A seed grows in the darkness of the soil. A child develops in the quiet shelter of the womb. You don't stand over the ground demanding to see roots form, nor do you tear open the soil to check if something is happening. You trust the process because you know that growth takes place where it's unseen. That's how God works in your life too. He is cultivating strength, building endurance, refining character in places that no one else can see. The struggle you're in isn't wasted. It's sacred construction. The silence you feel is not abandonment. It's incubation. When you look back on your life, you'll realize that some of your most significant breakthroughs came from seasons where you thought God was silent. You may not have seen the evidence at the time, but He was aligning the right people, shifting circumstances, closing doors that would have led to harm, and opening pathways that you weren't yet ready to walk. If He had shown you what He was doing, you might have interfered or tried to rush the process. That's why He often hides His hand to protect the integrity of what He's building within you. We live in an age that values visibility above all else. We equate being seen with being significant, but in God's design, hiddenness is not punishment, it's preparation. Before David ever became king, he spent years alone in the fields, tending sheep. No applause, no recognition, no royal robes, just long days of solitude. Yet it was there that he learned courage, faith, and humility. God was shaping his heart in private for the responsibility he would later carry in public. The same principle applies to you. The unseen years are not wasted, they are foundational. What God builds in the dark is what will sustain you in the light. The danger comes when impatience convinces you that silence equals rejection. You pray and hear nothing. You hope and see no change, and slowly you start to believe that maybe you've been forgotten. What if this delay is actually divine timing? What if this quiet season is where God is teaching you trust? Trust that doesn't depend on evidence, but on His character. Faith isn't built when everything makes sense, it's built when nothing does. When you can stand in uncertainty and still believe that He is working, that's when your faith matures. Sometimes, the proof of God's presence is not in what changes, but in the strength you gain while waiting. You begin to notice that you're not as fragile as you once were, that your heart has learned resilience, that peace can exist even when the answer hasn't come. Quiet growth, that unseen strengthening, is the work of God's hand. You don't need to see it to know it's real. So if you feel forgotten, remember this: the hidden seasons are holy. They are where your roots go deep enough to sustain the weight of what's coming. The flower doesn't rush to bloom. It unfolds when the light finally reaches it. And when it does, all that hidden work suddenly makes sense. God has not abandoned you. He's working in the silence, shaping you for the moment when everything He's been preparing finally comes into view. There comes a point in every person's journey when faith stops feeling certain. You reach a place where prayers seem unanswered, where obedience feels unrewarded, and where the silence of heaven begins to echo louder than your own thoughts. It's in that space where nothing makes sense that your endurance is tested the most. You start asking questions you never thought you would. Why is this happening? Why hasn't anything changed? Does God even see me anymore? These questions aren't signs of doubt, they're signs of depth. They mean you've reached a place where superficial faith no longer works, where belief must become personal and rooted, not just emotional. It's easy to trust God when life is unfolding according to your plans, but when everything starts to unravel, when doors close and confusion becomes constant, that's when faith begins to take on its truest form. It stops being a feeling and becomes a decision. You don't always feel strong. You don't always feel hopeful. But you choose to keep standing, to keep believing, to keep doing what's right even when it feels pointless. That's not weakness. That's the highest form of strength, because perseverance in uncertainty is the purest expression of trust. It means you've decided that your faith is not dependent on your circumstances, on the unchanging nature of God Himself. We often expect faith to remove hardship, but in reality, faith often sustains us through it. God doesn't always part the sea immediately. Sometimes He teaches you how to walk on the water while the storm is still raging. That's the difference between temporary relief and lasting transformation. You're not just learning how to survive your struggle. You're learning how to walk with peace inside it. The confusion you feel is not evidence that you've lost your way. It's evidence that you're being led into a deeper understanding of who you are and who God is. In these moments, you have to resist the urge to measure progress by what you can see. Faith is not about sight, it's about trust in the unseen. Just because there's no visible proof that things are improving doesn't mean they aren't. God often works in hidden ways, orchestrating shifts that you can't yet perceive. The waiting is difficult because it strips you of control, and that's precisely the point. True faith begins where control ends. It's in surrender that you discover peace, not because you've stopped caring, because you've started trusting. Every person who has walked closely with God has faced a season like this. Abraham waited decades for his promise. Joseph endured years of betrayal and imprisonment before he saw purpose unfold. Even Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane faced silence and suffering before glory. The pattern is always the same: endurance first, revelation later. The refining always precedes the reward. That's how faith matures. It's tested in fire so it can emerge unshakable. So if you're standing in that confusing middle ground, don't lose heart. You may not understand what God is doing, but that doesn't mean He's not doing something. You may not see the path forward. That doesn't mean there isn't one. Your perseverance in this moment is not wasted. It's preparing you for what's ahead. There will come a time when you'll look back and realize that these very days of uncertainty were shaping you, deepening you, and anchoring you in ways that comfort never could. Keep walking even if your steps feel heavy. Keep believing even if your voice trembles when you pray. The light will come, it always does. And when it does, you'll see that your endurance was never in vain. It was the bridge between your pain and your breakthrough, the quiet strength that carried you through the dark into the dawn that was closer than you thought. It's easy to think of a breakthrough as a single, spectacular moment when everything changes. The door opens, the answer arrives, the burden lifts. But more often, the real breakthrough happens long before that moment ever arrives. It happens quietly in the process of endurance, in the shaping of your inner world. God's greatest work is rarely about altering your circumstances first. It's about transforming you within them. We keep asking Him to change what's around us, but He's far more interested in changing what's inside us. Because once you are changed, everything around you begins to align differently. The process itself is what refines you. Every disappointment, every delay, every unanswered prayer is part of a divine workshop where your faith is being forged. You start to learn that strength isn't built in comfort. It's built in resistance. Just like a muscle grows when it's stretched and strained, your spirit deepens when it's tested. The circumstances you wish would disappear might be the very tools God is using to carve wisdom, patience, and compassion into your soul. You may think you're waiting for the breakthrough, but often the breakthrough is waiting for you to become ready, to be grounded enough to hold what you've been praying for. Transformation is rarely instantaneous. It's a process of unlearning fear, releasing control, and realigning your heart with trust. That takes time, and that's what makes it so sacred. We live in a culture that worships speed, where waiting feels like failure. But God doesn't operate on human timelines. He's not in a rush. He's in the business of permanence. He doesn't want to give you something that collapses under pressure. He wants to make you someone who can carry blessing without breaking under it. And that kind of preparation happens in the slow, hidden places of endurance. There's a beauty in realizing that even your pain has purpose. Every time you choose faith over frustration, you're being transformed. Every time you decide to keep showing up, to pray again, to try again, to forgive again, you're growing into the person you were meant to be. These small acts of perseverance may seem insignificant, but they're constructing the foundation of your future. You're learning resilience not by escaping hardship, but by walking through it with grace. That's what God values, not perfect outcomes, but a heart that refuses to quit even when nothing makes sense. When the breakthrough finally arrives, and it won't just be about the result. It will be about who you've become in the process. You'll see that the waiting wasn't wasted. The struggle wasn't pointless. You'll realize that you've developed strength you didn't know you had, patience you never thought possible, and faith that no circumstance can shake. The event itself might be brief, but the transformation lasts. The miracle was never just the answered prayer, it was the person who emerged because of it. And when you reach that moment, you look back and see that God's timing was never late. Every delay served a purpose. Every detour taught a lesson, and every moment of pain carried you toward wisdom. You'll see that the same God who seemed silent was actually guiding you through a process that was about far more than the outcome. It was about forming your identity, anchoring your heart, and awakening you to the truth that faith isn't about control. It's about surrender. So don't despise the process. Don't rush it. Don't assume that because things aren't changing, you aren't growing. The invisible work of transformation is happening even now. God is not just preparing your blessing, He's preparing you for it. And when the time comes, you won't just step into a new season, you'll step into it as a new person, stronger, wiser, and finally ready for what He has always had in store for you. Hope is one of the most misunderstood forces in the human heart. People often think of it as something fragile, naive, or passive, an emotion for those who don't see the world clearly. But real hope is not weakness, it's defiance. It's the quiet rebellion of the soul that refuses to be crushed by despair. When you choose to hope while everything around you tells you to give up, you're standing in direct opposition to the darkness. You're saying, I believe there is meaning beyond this pain, even if I can't see it yet. That kind of hope isn't born out of comfort. It's forged in suffering. It's what remains when every other reason to believe has fallen away. When you are weary, hope feels like the smallest thing in the world. It flickers like a candle in a storm, barely visible against the wind of disappointment. But what you often don't realize is that this small flame is stronger than you think. It's the light that keeps you from collapsing into the void. Every time you choose to hope, every time you decide to believe that God is still good, still working, still present, you are participating in something divine. You're aligning yourself with the creative force that brought the universe into being, the same power that brings order out of chaos. Hope in its truest form is not wishful thinking, it's faith in motion. There's something sacred about holding on to hope when your circumstances give you no reason to. It's an act of trust that transcends understanding. It doesn't ignore reality, it transcends it. When you hope, you're not denying that life is hard. You're affirming that hardship doesn't have the final word. You're declaring that there's more to your story than the struggle you see today. And that declaration carries power. Because hope doesn't just change how you feel, it changes how you move. It shifts your posture, your choices, your energy. It gives you the strength to take one more step, to pray one more prayer, to keep showing up even when you're exhausted. The beautiful thing about hope is that it multiplies. One small act of courage inspires another. One person's faith in the darkness becomes a light for someone else who's lost their way. That's how God works through our endurance. Your hope is not just for you. It's for those watching you persevere, for those who need to be reminded that it's possible to keep believing even when nothing makes sense. You may not realize it, but your faith in this moment could be the seed of someone else's breakthrough. And perhaps that's why God doesn't remove every struggle instantly. He allows you to walk through uncertainty, not to break you, but to build a faith that cannot be shaken. Because when you face despair and chosen hope anyway, when you've been surrounded by darkness and refuse to let it define you, you emerge with a strength that no comfort could ever produce. That's the kind of faith that changes lives. It's living proof that God's light still pierces even the deepest night. So if you feel your hope fading, protect that small flame. Speak life over it. Feed it with truth, with prayer, with gratitude even in the smallest things. Hope doesn't need grand evidence to survive. It just needs willingness. You may feel close to breaking, but your breakthrough is closer still. God sees every act of courage, every time you've chosen to keep believing despite your pain. He knows how hard it's been, and He hasn't forgotten you. Hold on. Hope is not pretending the storm isn't real. It's believing that it won't last forever. It's the steady conviction that the same God who guided you through the night will bring you into morning. And when that dawn comes, you'll see that your hope was not wasted. It was the very thing that carried you through, the silent strength that led you into the breakthrough that was always closer than you imagined.